Hi everyone, it's M.S.G, and today I am going to be continuing my guide for Chaos Space Marines. This is part 3, which will include our Battleline units, their uses, and which ones should you bring. Obviously, I am aware there's not many to choose from, given the fact that there's only 2, but I can assure you that you'll definitely learn something here by watching. And if I do sound a bit bunged up, is because I do have what appears to be either a chest infection or COVID. So if I do put you off by how I'm talking, so I apologise. But either way, let's continue. So the video, simply put, is just going to cover information relating to CSM battle line units. It's exactly where it says on the tin. It's just Cultist mob and Legionaries. I'll be analysing the the data sheets themselves, the loadouts, their possible uses, and how I personally run them in my own games. So please keep in mind as well that with the entire guide, everything is subject to change. For example, balanced data slates, which I am going to touch on. Bad stuff could become good, and good stuff could become bad, and vice versa. But like I said, it's just par for the course at this point. The game's ever changing, so this guide's not going to be consistently correct, unfortunately. But as of when the video is released, within the few months, it usually is. So the ranking system, again, just for those who are unfamiliar with it, I've just done it in a simple 1 to 9 plus. So 1 is avoid at all costs, 2 is very bad, 3 is bad, 4 is slightly below average, 5 is bang average, 6 is slightly above average, 7 is good, 8 is great, and 9 plus is exceptional. So these are your top tier units. Obviously, anything in the green is considered usable. Maybe up to 5 or 6 in a casual game, but usually you don't want to do that. So, just to briefly touch upon it, I'm abundantly aware that the balanced data slate has completely shafted us. We have had quite a lot of nerfs when it comes to a lot of our staple units and stratagems in particular. So I'm just going to highlight a few that have stuck out. So the marks of chaos now have to align to be allowed into a transport. So for example, a Mark of Slanesh unit can no longer be placed in a Mark of Nurgle Rhino or a Land Raider, which does have a massive impact on a lot of lists. So, for example, if you think you were running your Nurgle Rhinos with Undivided Chosen, you're not going to do that anymore, which is pretty bad. I'm not going to lie for us. However, there are ways around it. I understand from a law perspective it's good, but it's just no. Dark Obscuration got nerfed, and admittedly, yeah, it kind of needed to be. It's been exchanged. The range has been increased from 18 inches. So it means now it only works outside of 18 and not 12, which again, it needed a nerf. It was a ridiculously strong stratagem, but it's still really good. Like, you can still use it quite effectively depending on your positioning. Purveying Zeal now only offers rerolling wounds, so you don't get full rerolls to hit as well. It's just base kit reroll wounds if the unit is undivided. You still do get to reroll ones, because you are undivided. That is the benefit of your Dark Pact, but you can still get it for free. So free rerolls to wound on a Chaos Lord with Chosen is still pretty good. And the rules change in particular. This is the one I have the biggest gripe with. What they've done with the Accursed Cultist. I'll just explain what they've done. So they've changed the rules for the Accursed Cultist, so they're now OC1, where there were 2. They can now heal in only your command phase and not both command phases, and they've been increased to 210 points respectively. So it was originally 105. That's right, it's 105 as opposed to 95 now, and the max unit is 210 as opposed to 190. They did go too far on this one. It's your average Games Workshop experience where you don't touch the rules and the points. You touch one. You make the good stuff good, but you put a price tag on it that makes it worth bringing, so you can't spam it. You don't make the good stuff less good and then make it more expensive, because what's the fucking point? There isn't one. A Curse of Cultists is still pretty nasty, but as far as I'm concerned, you're not going to be seeing many of them at all. So points increases, just to briefly cover this, Chaos Lord has gone from 75 to 95. about a 20 to 25 point increase overall, which is considerably noticeable for a unit that was abundantly as commonplace in lists as a Chaos Lord. But the Chaos Lord is still exceptionally good. Like, no one's going to say he's trash at all. Chosen have gone up again, expected. They were 110 to 130. This is obviously going to have to be expected given how strong they were for the price. Still believe you can bring them, I'll be honest. For 260 for 10 is actually quite reasonably priced for a unit that can advance, shoot, charge innately, and has dart packs, and has pretty good melee, and 3 wounds as well. So 3 damage weaponry is pretty good into them, but again, it doesn't matter. They're still really good. Dark Commune's gone up. Again, this is probably because of the nerf to the cultists, but I still think they're actually pretty good. So they went from the price of a 10-man unit of cultist mob to a slightly more expensive. They're now 65. Again, just I don't understand why people seem to think the Dark Commune's bad now. Like, I understand why, but it's mainly due to how they've dealt with the accursed cultist, which is what I have my gripe with. I honestly think, though, that the Dark Commune is still pretty good. Forge Fiend has gone up again, not to be, it's obvious. Like, it's going to go up. It's strength 10 minus 3 damage, dev wounds, fire from 3d3 shots with data packs. It's just they're just insanely strong, and it does kind of screw us against Custodes. But again, we can still beat Custodes semi-reliably. There are ways to beat them. Obliterators have gone up again, which another expected one that's so common in a lot of lists. The just sheer amount of damage they can throw out based on, for example, 6 damage a shot with Melter on the high profile. I'd still bring them. I think they go up by a considerable amount if you keep bringing them, but you can honestly, there's alternatives that you can bring. But Obliterators are still definitely one of the ones that you want to consider. Warp Talons have gone up. They went from 100 to 110. I was surprised by this, I'll be honest, because, Warp Talons were they're actually pretty strong unit, but they're outclassed in majority of circumstances, in my opinion. Warp Talons are for damage, Raptors are for actions and point scoring and stuff, and occasional shooting. But Warp Talons are still really good, though, so don't think that they're bad now. So you've got 110 points for 5 when it was originally 100. Cornlord of Skulls has gone up. I have no idea why, from 450 to 480. So to the 2 people who are running this model, I am sorry, because you are unfathomably based. I absolutely adore the Lord of Skulls. It's such a meme model. But enjoy paying a third and a quarter, respectively, of whatever point limit you're bringing for one model. Eye of Zinch has gone up. Again, I have no idea why, because I genuinely can't remember the last time if I even took this. I think I used it in like a casual game once, and it did nothing. So I never brought it again. But it's just really, really it's just questionable Games Workshop again. So new codex, on a more positive note, has been announced. So the 10th edition codex has been announced and should be available within the next few months. So if you're wanting to get into Chaos Space Marines, share this video around. No, I'm just kidding. But it's a great time for us to get into Chaos Space Marines for those who are new or for those who are dipping their toes into it. To quote the actual article, it's said to be one of the largest codexes so far, boasting up to 8 different detachments, which, quote, capture the fighting styles of the classic traitor legions. Fantastic. Emperor's Children Codex when? Just kidding. Well, no, I'm not just kidding. I really want the Emperor's Children Codex. This also includes a detachment for the pirates / renegades and raiders. So, much love to my Red Corsair brothers out there. If you are avoiding tax, you are unfathomably based, and I wish you all the best. And hopefully, and this is me being very optimistic, the new devotees to Vashtor detachment is good. Because Vashtor at the minute is absolutely terrible. He's one of our worst models, which sucks because he looks aesthetically, he's awesome. His lore's really cool, and it's a breath of fresh air. But again, fingers crossed, I'm optimistic. So, another big one for the Chaos Lord enjoyers out there. The new Chaos Lord model. Obviously, pictured are the 2 varieties that have been shown at Adepticon. The left one is a Black Legion one with a helmet, which is the horned helmet, and it's got what appears to have the the classic coat with the fur, you know, just the swag coat basically. And the other one is a very well painted Alpha Legion model with the helmet off, which is obviously you can customize them now. They have the Thunderhammer, which is the one pictured in near the center on the right. The Power Maul, which is the one on the the right in the right arm of the Alpha Legionary Chaos Lord with the plasma pistol. You can have Warp Talons. You can have accursed weapons. You can have an axe. You can have a power fist. Again, you've basically now got a customizable Chaos Lord, which is fantastic. Thank you, Games Workshop. And finally, the Jump Pack Lord is back. So for every 8th edition enjoyer that we have had, rejoice. The man, the myth, the legend, the Chaos Heretic Smash Captain is hopefully going to be back. The Night Lords players, all 3 of them that I know, are absolutely ecstatic for this guy because I mean, look how cool he is. Like the whole flesh cape on the abdomen and like the groin area, the eye in the center, the dagger, the lightning claws, the jump pack itself, the posture. I just think it looks so good. And he is apparently going to get his own data sheet, which, fingers crossed is good and is worth bringing. But I'm just happy to have this guy back. I do remember the old days of bringing a Thunderhammer on a jump lord and just beating the absolute fuck out of everything. It was one of my favourite times to play, and conveniently, it's when I started playing in 8th edition. But let's go on. So, Cultist Mob, here's the data sheet. We're going to start off briefly with just looking at it. The stat line's not too impressive, I'm not going to lie, but the main thing we're trying to find out here is the keywords. So they're infantry, Battleline, which means you can take up to 6 different data sheets of them. They have grenades, which is great. Chaos and Cultist Mob, standard stuff. Not particularly too much on this particular instance. It's the data sheet. You're all quite familiar, and for those who aren't, you now are. So the loadout. The loadout for the Chaos Cultists is, when I read it originally, I was a bit confused because I was like, oh, you can replace, you can have a melee cultist, you can have them as a range cultists, which would be better. So I sat down and conveniently, for those who were wondering, I have optimized which loadout to bring on them. So first up, we have the range loadout, which is the Mark of Chaos for the Mark of Nurgle. Dark Obscuration Stratagem is quite good on them if you do need to use it, but again, you might not need to. It depends. If you've got an abundance of CP, you can do. But for the actual range loadout, it's 7 Cultist Firearms, which is Ballistic Skill 4 up, 24-inch range, 1 shot, Rapid Fire 1, Strength 3 0, AP 1 damage. You also get access to a Flamer, which is 12-inch, D6 auto hitting, Ignoring Cover, Strength 4 0, AP 1 damage, Heavy Stubber, hitting on 5s unless you stand still, 48-inch range, 4 attacks, Rapid Fire 3, Heavy, Strength 4 0, 1 damage, and Grenade Launcher, which has obviously 2 profiles, but you are hitting on 4s, 24-inch range. You can have the Frag, which is Blast, D6, Strength 4 0, AP 1 damage, or the Crack, which is 1 attack, hitting on 4 up, Strength 9, -2, D3 damage. For the melee loadout, it's pretty simple. Much like most things Khorne, it's very cut and dry. 10 brutal assault weapons, which hitting on 4s, 2 attacks each, strength 3, 0 AP, 1 damage, and 10 auto pistols, which are essentially the same 12-inch range, 1 attack pistol, strength 3, 0 AP, 1 damage, hitting on 4s. You're not going to be using the pistols, but which loadout would I recommend using on the Cultist Mob ranged like every single time? The melee is absolutely atrocious. It's laughable. So again, as I've listed here, the melee damage output is laughable despite having dark packs, and you'd need to be in combat, which is normally where you don't want your cultists to be, unless you're move blocking. At least with the range damage, you can throw out some high strength weaponry from comparative safety. Again, it's a case of maximising the use of the unit you've already got. Why would I throw these guys into the meat grinder on purpose when they can possibly do something else to compensate? But again, it depends on your game. Next up, we do have the 2 leadership options. So on the left we have the Dark Apostle, and on the right we have the Dark Commune. I forgot the name for a second there. So the Dark Apostle, pros, it brings the unit to toughness 4 because it bases it on the unit leader, and if the unit itself has toughness 5 and toughness 4 in it, the unit is toughness 5, which is great. The Dark Apostle itself is a pain to kill because he and the disciples he has have a 4-up invulnerable base kit. Unfortunately, he doesn't give it to the unit he's in though. The Demagogue rule is okay if you, for example, get battle shocked, but you don't have to use it on the unit he's leading. You can use it on the one that's within 9 inches. You don't have to pick the one that's being led by the Dark Apostle. The cons: +1 to wound in melee with cultists is predominantly, it's great if you're running like a cursed cultist where you can actually get some melee damage. However, +1 to wound on this guy in a melee. You're wounded on like 5s anyway, and if you're going to be running a melee, you'd be bringing lethal hits on 5s for corn anyway. So +1 to wound is like, there's no point in doing it basically. Dark packs just make this obsolete. Malign Sacrifice is shooting yourself in the foot as well. It's one of the worst abilities in the game, if not the worst ability in the game. It actively fucks you over, and you have to get really lucky to even get equal returns on it. It's just such a bad ability. Next up, though, Dark Commune. Pros is a 5-up invul for the cultist, which is surprisingly good. If you don't have access to a Baden, you can just slap a Dark Commune in, and it makes them a lot more durable. Any AP is now going on a 5-up invul. Again, for a cultist model, it's better than nothing. Re-rolling leadership tests for Dark Pact is great because sometimes you do roll poor for Dark Pacts, and you have 50% chance to get, oh no, sorry, about 40% chance to pass on cultists because they've got a 7-up leadership. So it's difficult to consistently pass it, and having the reroll as a backup is nice. Dark Ritual is good as well if you want to suicide charge into a unit on an objective. So the +1 to hit, you're hitting on 3s, and you're wounded on 5s mostly, or 4s, which again, nice. Cons, Blast. Just Blast will completely ruin your day. So you get 15 models minimum, which means most blast weapons get between 3 to 2 shots. The unit's still toughness 3, so even like the most generic, terrible shooting, like for example bolt guns and other weapons that are just strength 4, 0 damage, 0 AP, 1 damage, just cannon fodder guns, are just gonna still wound you on 3s and quite reliably kill you. Uh, and the Dark Commune is more optimally used elsewhere, in my opinion. I think they're far better on Accursed Cultists because of the fact that you've got the advance and charge on a unit that has pretty much exclusively got melee, and you want them in melee anyway. So these guys are better with the Accursed, not the Cultist mob. So if I was going to bring one, would I bring a leader to attach to Cultist? Short answer, none. You'd be making a cheap throwaway unit more expensive for little to no tangible benefit. And if you are adamant on bringing one, for example in a casual game, it's probably better to bring the Dark Commune over the Dark Apostle. But ultimately, I wouldn't even bother bringing a leader on them anyway, because again, the cannon fodder, you're not supposed to care. So the pros, so just to briefly run through this, are 55 points for 10 and 110 for 20. They are 25mm base size, obviously the Battleline. Their pros are they're extremely cheap, so 55 points for a 10-man squad that you can just slap on an objective. Fine, just take it. The one of the best units in the game for that. Speaking of which, they're also one of the best units in the game because of this ability. So their ability for the Dark Gods essentially is sticky objectives, which for those who aren't familiar with the actual ruling, it means that they can sit on an objective, capture it, and if that objective stays under your control, for example, if your enemy doesn't jump on it, you basically keep that objective and they don't have to be on it, which is sensationally good. It's pretty useful just to have, just in case you wanted to deep strike screen. So, for example, you can run them on an objective. Next turn, run them off it, stand them in a spot where you think you might have overextended, put these guys there. Congratulations, you've now blocked that deep strike coming in. It's just great. It's just really useful. It's probably one of the best abilities in the game, in my opinion. Like, it's definitely like S tier. Uh, Cultists are very versatile as well. So you can action monkey. They've got a large footprint when it comes to blocking deep strike and movement. Cannon fodder, you don't really care if they die because you're 55 points. Move blocking, they've just got. I will explain this later on in the slideshow, but they are just so good for like the little tricks and tech you can do with them that allows you to just be as annoying as possible, and you can get so much out of them for the meager stuff that you have to pay for them. It's just well worth it. And again, if you've got the command point spare, the last point for them on the pros is that dark obscuration is great. So, for example, like I mentioned yesterday in the earlier slide, their most optimal mark is with Mark and Nurgle. So obviously you can get the dark obscuration low not rule on them. If you want these guys to stay on an objective, just keep them defended, for example, or just move them up without getting hit. If you are running a lot of CP generation, so for example, Eye of Zinch, uh, the Master of Executions, Abaddon, anything like that, you are going to get a lot extra CP that you'd normally not be able to use. You can use it on these guys. However, just to reiterate, you can only get one extra command point per turn in addition to the one you get in your command phase. You can't get +4 CP like you used to, which is good. Next up, we have the cons. They're very easy to kill. They're a 6-up armor save T3 1 wound model. They're just going to get absolutely shredded by even the most basic of small arms fire or indirect fire. Anything with a pip of AP basically just outright kills them if they're not in cover. And it's just pretty much a pain in the ass for them to just immediately. They get sneezed on and they die, essentially. But as I've stated here, they can use Go to Ground for a command point, which is a 5-up armor save and a 6-up invulnerable save, so they do get the benefit of cover. And the invul save is great if they're getting anything that's in a nasty AP, like AP2, for example. Sometimes there are people who will shoot AP2 into cultists, which just baffles me, but people do it. So it's usually not worth giving them objectively worse 6-up invul when they can have access to Abaddon's 4-up invulnerable aura, which is free. However, with that's more of a point of contention. If you know you're going to get punched hard next turn, you've got to then do it in your turn to give the command aura out. But 9 times out of 10, well, not 9 times out of 10, I'd probably say about more often than not, like 6 to 7 times out of 10, when you're playing with Abaddon, you're going to use the reroll hits for everything within 6 inches. But again, you can get access to Abaddon, as mentioned in my part 2. You can bring him up to the mid board and put these guys next to him, and it is 50% chance to ignore any incoming damage, which is great. Blast is an issue. Again, you can't really remedy this because it's blast. Any decent strength weaponry blast is going to melt them. So, for example, the grenade launcher, even flamers absolutely shred these guys. Anything, like I said, that normally you'd shrug off, these guys will die to. Terrible leadership. 7-up leadership's really, really not good. And if they get dark pacts, I have the amount of times I've failed a leadership test and killed 3 of them despite killing like one model is beyond me. Like I remember once we were having a casual game, me and my friend Niall, and he's playing Blood Angels, and I end up charging I end up charging him with cultists into some Death Company Marines. There's like 3 of them, and I end up killing one of them. So there's 2 left, and then I roll the Dark Pact and get 3 killed, and then obviously next turn it's his turn to fight, and he just absolutely shreds me. But you know what can you do? Uh, Speaking of which, the damage output is absolutely terrible. It's better if you use them from range again, because melee you do not want them to be in melee. The extra attack from the brutal assault weapon is not going to benefit you in any scenario unless you're fighting against toughness 3 units. But it's you don't want these guys in melee. It's that simple. So deep strike, denial, and screening. These are key tactics you can use with most units. However, I'm going to illustrate it in this video with the cultist mob. So, as I've written, screening is a commonly used tactic used in most games of 40k. Even a rudimentary understanding of this can massively improve your overall skill level. Simply put, screening is utilizing the positioning of your units, usually disposable or less important units, to restrict your opponent's movement in certain capacities. This is primarily used to prevent opponents from strategic reserve, from jumping into the fight, or move blocking an important unit from accessing an objective and or choke point. With the abundance of rapid ingress in games, it's vital to get your screening units into position as soon as possible. Cultists, despite their fragility, are great at doing this, due to their minimum unit size of 10 and a maximum at 20. Understanding the rules of unit coherency is massively important when it comes to maximising the potential for your screening. Each model must end their own movement within 2 inches horizontal and 5 inches vertical to one other model if it's 2 to 6 models, or 2 if it's 7 plus models within the same unit. I shall now illustrate how to get the most optimal movement out of your unit on the diagram in order to cover the most surface area. So as you can see here, we have the 10-man unit of cultists. They are all within coherency, and I have done this on Tabletop Simulator. I've measured it from base to base, not from the center, from each center. This is from the tip of that base to the tip of another base. They are within the unit coherency rules, which means that because they're in a unit of 10, they have to be within 2 inches of 2 or more models within the unit, which is fine. So for example, here, he's in range of these two guys, he's in range of these two and these two, and this is one of the ways that I personally run them. So measuring from the 9 inches away from the furthest point on the x-axis, we have a 32.5 inch gap to block, because it's 9 inches including the opponent's base size, which I'll briefly mention next, from the base around the model. So, for example, these guys have got a far bigger surface area. I'm terrible at math, so I'm not going to figure that out. However, it only goes up depending on what size of the base your opponent is deep striking in, because the opponent has to have their base wholly on the battlefield in order to use the model. So even if, for example, they've got a 32mm base and you're making it so they can only use 30 or 28mm of it, and the bits hanging off the side, congratulations, that model's now dead because it doesn't fit in the actual arena. So with a max amount of space utilised as shown below, a unit of 10 cultists can deny up to 32.48 specifically, inches of space horizontally in this position. Obviously this can change depending on the positioning of the unit within coherency, but in my games I use this particular formation a lot and it seems to work a charm. You can also take into account the opponent's base size for their deep striking units. The larger the base, the more effective your screening will be, as their entire base diameter needs to fully fit onto the board, otherwise they are unable to place their model. This is prominent when dealing with strategic reserves, as rules as written, they have to wholly be within 6 inches of a table edge and not within your opponent's deployment zone until the third battle round. Your opponent's models have to have their entire base fully outside of the 9-inch bubble, otherwise they can't enter. Using multiple 10-man units of cultists can cover far more space than you believe so. This specific positioning is great if you plan to keep them on a backline objective. However, please be aware that this makes them a bigger target, which, if you lose models, which is likely given how easy they are to kill, will drastically reduce their overall capability to deny deep strike. I have seen players lose 2 to 3 cultists to small arms fire, as a result of this, they have their backline compromised. This can be remedied through the use of the Dark Obscuration stratagem if you really feel like you have to keep them alive. So move blocking. Movement blocking is another gun in your holster when it comes to dealing with vehicles, big models and larger base size models or units, which already have a difficult time navigating certain terrain. Simply put, it is essentially moving your models in a place or position to physically block your opponent from moving. There is also important to note that you can never end a normal advance or fallback move within 1 inch of an enemy unit, as that unit would put it into engagement range. However, as I've mentioned here, and as a friend of mine who plays World Eaters has kindly pointed out, the Corn Berserkers and their blood surge ability means that if they can get into engagement range of it, they are allowed to. So if I shoot them and they move up to 6 inches and they can get within engagement range, they are now within engagement range of that unit. Usually, you can only get into engagement range if you charge, pile in, or consolidate into another unit. However, there are rules like this which you do need to be careful of because World Eaters have got a lot of melee damage and a lot of movement tricks they can do. So it's important to be aware. It's mainly a niche matchup thing. I hate tailoring it, but World Eaters, despite the win rate at the moment, are actually pretty fucking strong. I think they could do a little more love, but again, in melee, you're going to lose into World Eaters unless you're playing Custodies and just pop fight first, which again, you know, I, I understand Custodies are meant to be these like super banana boys and the great at everything in it, but it just leaves a sour taste in my mouth when you outplay somebody and they just go, nope, fight first. And yes, I am salty, but you know, in all seriousness, though, Custodies are awesome. I do love Custodies, but the fight first rule needs to just seriously have a look at. But again, off topic. My apologies. So, utilizing movement blocking is important if you're going up against a lot of vehicles, cavalry units, or monsters, or other large base size models, as it will make choke points impossible for your opponent to traverse through. Please keep in mind that the fly keyword will very reliably counter your move blocking attempts, but there are ways to deal with this in very niche circumstances. So, for example, if I was to put a unit in the middle of a choke point on an objective and a tank wished to go through, the tank would have to either one, charge me, two, park up outside of where I am, three, shoot me, or disembark the units that he has in, which he can't do if he moves up at a certain point, and then charge me, which is exactly what I want because then that means his units now lose that movement bonus, which he would have got within the what's it called, the Rhino or whatever. So to illustrate this, disembarking shenanigans. So this ties back into the previous slide of move blocking, but it's a more specific example on how to deal with it. So in the tabletop simulator version, the Rhino was advanced in their turn, and the 10-man unit of cultists were on the objective. I know that if assault intercessors disembark and then charge next turn, I will lose the objective, so I decide to take the initiative. I deep strike my warp talons in. Oh, sorry, I don't deep strike them in. In my turn, my warp talons, which were placed on the sides, have advanced, and now they will bubble wrap the Rhino. All units inside the Rhino, as the rules state, have to set up wholly within 3 inches of the transport and not be within engagement range of any of my opponent's models. So, they can't set up within any of the grey circles area because that would mean that they would be in engagement range of my Warp Talons. However, this would also force them to use what I'm going to previously mention as a emergency disembark. So, for example, I've surrounded the unit and I've put the cultists off the objective and brought them in. Once I've surrounded it, I will begin to shoot the Rhino to death with the rest of my army. So, for example, Obliterators, Havocs, any kind of hard hitting anti tank shooting is going to be great at doing this. And obviously, the opponent can't disembark without being in range of my unit. They can't go through the sandbags because the sandbags are about 6 inches high and it's impassable terrain. They can't go through the terrain on the right because that's impassable. There's no doors or anything to get through. And they can't climb up over the 3 inch tall blue brick at the bottom because they would still have to use that extra 3 inches to get out of engagement range, which would still not be possible given the red ring on the actual screen now is the range for the emergency disembark. If they end up within 1 inch of me during that, their unit dies. The opponent cannot disembark, as shown in grey, or even emergency disembark, which is shown in red, as they would still be within 1 inches of my warp talons or my cultists. So, rules as written, the entire unit will die. I don't lose the objective because of the cultist sticky objectives. The cultists have then basically shored up the defences and the move block attempt, so they can't get onto that objective. And their entire unit has just died. Your opponent will know this sometimes, and it's important to mention this and don't be that guy who goes gotcha. You want to make it fair for your opponent, So just say, look, I'm going to move block this. If they're at a tournament, you're not obligated to do that, but this is definitely something that your opponent will be aware of and will try to avoid positioning as a result. But if you do see this and you've got the opportunity to essentially get rid of an entire unit for free, do it. Where would I rank them? It's a 10 out of 10. These guys are a cornerstone for a majority of my lists. I will never bring a list without 10 cultists. They're just exceptional. They're a premier cannon fodder unit. They don't do much damage, and if they're going to die to any shooting or melee, then they're going to die to it. But you shouldn't care. Sacrificial lambs, which can do actions, have sticky objectives in combination with movement tricks that I've shown you, always make them synergize well with your entire army. I will always bring a unit of 10 in every single game, maybe more depending on how I feel, but I will always bring 10. Next up is the Legionaries. So again, just a data sheet, standard Space Marine profile, 6-inch move, toughness 4, 3 up armor, 2 wounds, 6 up leadership, 2 OC. Literally just a Space Marine profile. It's nothing remarkable. Keywords, they have infantry, Battleline, chaos, grenades, and legionaries. The grenades thing I will mention when we get to the stratagems. So the loadouts. As mentioned, the Legionary loadout, when I looked at the Cultist one, I thought, okay, this is a bit weird. I looked at the Legionary one and I wanted to smash my head against the wall because that's just a load of words. It's just text. However, I have taken the liberty of providing you with the optimal ranged and melee loadout as previously done with the Cultist. So, if you look on the screen now, you can see both of the ranged loadouts. So, for example, you have both the range and the melee loadout. That's supposed to say melee. That's a mistake. I should have fixed it. But the ranged loadout for Nurgle, obviously, because Nurgle exploding fighters to hit. You have an aspiring champion who has the plasma pistol, which is 12 inches, 1 attack, hitting on 3s, strength 7, -2, 1 damage. If you base kit it, if you don't overcharge. You also have a bolt gun, which has 24-inch range, 2 shots, hitting on 3, strength 4, 0 damage, 0 AP, 1 damage. You also get a chaos icon, which allows you to reroll your leadership test for dark packs, which is excellent. Balefire Tome, which is 18-inch range, 2 attacks, psychic, ballistic skill 3 up, strength 5, -1 AP, 1 damage. Pretty decent. You can have a choice of which ones you take. So, for example, in my loadout, I have the Havoc Auto Cannon. So it's 48-inch range, heavy, hitting on 4s. So if you stand still, you're hitting on 3s. 2 shots, strength 9, -1, 3 damage. Or you can bring a las cannon, 48-inch range, you standard las cannon. So it's 1 shot, hitting on, well, this one's hitting on 4s unless you stand still. Strength 12, -3, d6 plus 1 damage. It's your las cannon. The Reaper Chain Cannon is probably one that you're wanting to bring more often than not. It's 24-inch range, 8 attacks, hitting on 4s, heavy, so if you stand still, it's hitting on 3s, strength 5, 0 AP, 1 damage. That is an exceptionally good weapon. I would definitely recommend using that. And you're just bringing 6 bolt guns next for 24-inch range, 2 shots each, hitting on 3s, strength 4, 0 AP, 1 damage. So the melee loadout is a unit size of 10 with a mark of Slanesh. You have the aspiring champion with the plasma pistol and a heavy melee weapon, which is 3 attacks. In melee, hitting on 3s, strength 8, -2, 2 damage. The Chaos Icon, again, is free. You don't get any negatives for bringing it. You might as well. You also get an additional heavy melee weapon for one of the Legionaries to carry, which is the same profile, hitting on 3s, 3 attacks, strength 8, -2 on AP, and 2 damage each. 8 bolt pistols, which are 12-inch, 1 shot, hitting on 3, strength 4, 0 AP, 1 damage, and it has pistols. And the Chain Swords, which are 4 attacks each, hitting on 3s, strength 4, -1, 1 damage. The reason as to why we run them with the Mark of Slanesh is because of the exploding 5s. We can run them with the lethals on 5 ups. However, in my experience and from what I've seen, Khorne is arguably the weakest Chaos Mark we have access to, and it sucks because I love all Chaos Gods equally, but Khorne is objectively one of the worst in my experience. It can deal a lot of damage and ignore it. Lethals are really good into certain games. However, more often than not, Slanesh just outperforms it, depending on what you're hitting. Obviously, it's a very big asterisk above that, but still. Uh, Next up is this. So, what recommended loadout? Melee for Legionaries. In a majority of circumstances, I'd say 9 times out of 10, you are going to want to run them with melee, but they can still have some decent shooting if you're willing to give up a few chain swords. Excuse me, let me mute my mic, my throat's a bit tickly. Thank you for that. So personally, I wouldn't bring them, as I like to bring full melee because it means you're getting an extra. So let's say you sacrifice it for the chain cannon, las cannon, and I don't know another melee, another ranged weapon. That's 12 attacks you've lost out on for your shooting. However, with a chain cannon, I would probably give up a chain sword to bring a chain cannon because the chain cannons are genuinely exceptionally good. Why do I recommend this? So, with the Mark of Slanesh, you have the ability to advance and shoot and charge and get sustained hits on melee on a 5 up, which is great because you're going to be throwing out a lot of attacks. So, 8 attacks, 8 times 4 is. God, I'm terrible at math. 32 attacks, exploding fives, full rerolls to hit if a bad one's nearby, advancing and charging, advancing, shooting and charging. You're just going to have like a ludicrous amount of mid to low damage attacks, but it's the sheer amount of damage you're going to throw out that is going to be an issue for your opponent because they're not going to pass all of those armor saves. They're not going to pass all of those invulnerable saves. They are going to get through, and it's going to chew through, surprisingly, a lot of stuff. And you get full rerolls to wound as well. And this is why. So, in addition, if you manage to get onto an objective, you will also get full rerolls to wound for free because that's their kit. So Mark of Corn isn't useful unless you're running a Baden nearby for full rerolls to hit and fish for lethals. Slanesh offers more maneuverability and adaptability, whilst Corn offers a more reliable fight on death, which is again, I think that's the worst stratagem we have access to. It's absolutely terrible. So while I usually go Mark of Slanesh, Corn is still viable. I'm not saying Corn is a bad mark. It's still really good. Getting lethal hits on a 5 up in melee is surprisingly really good. But the problem is that the stratagem is terrible, and the majority of the time it makes the ability of the legionaries obsolete. So there's no point. You're automatically wounded. Why would I need to re-roll wound rolls? But again, it depends. It's very niche. So, Legionaries, the leadership options. It's probably easier to address what units can't be attached to Legionaries than what as leaders than what can be. So, the ones that are able to be ran with Legionaries and have them attached to it is Abaddon, Huron Blackheart, Fabius Bile, the Master of Possession, the Chaos Lord, the Sorcerer, Lucius the Eternal, the Warpsmith, the Exalted Champion, the Dark Apostle, and the Master of Executions. Obviously, the Exalted Champion and Master of Executions have the ability to be attached to a unit that already has a leader, but they can't have 2 Master of Executions or 2 Exalted Champions. But you can have both. So you can have a Chaos Lord, for example, with an Exalted Champ and a Master of Executions in one unit. But again, I don't recommend doing that. So should you bring them with a leader? Yes. But I would recommend trying out different combinations in casual games. Try to get it into a competitive environment, like when you, for example, you are playing to win, just to stress test what your loadouts and your synergies can do. But do it in an environment where you're playing with a friend who is under the impression that you're going to play to win, but it's just a test game. It's a training game. My best friend Niall and I do it all the time. We just test out stuff that we could probably use competitively. You know, certain loadouts, certain leadership combinations, certain strategies, certain maneuverability. Sorry, maneuvering like stratagems, not actual stratagems, but I'm going off topic. Just ignore me. So the next few slides are going to be dedicated to what I believe the best leaders for legionaries are. So they're going to be listed into 3 categories. There's the best competitive choices. There is the fun for casual, but probably not best to be bringing them in a list for a tournament, for example. and the ones that you should probably avoid. So, surprise to no one, this is not in order, by the way. This is just in a random list order. It's not in a, oh, Abaddon's at the top, so he's the best. It's not. So, Abaddon is obviously, as a surprise to no one of the best leaders you can run with Legionaries. However, Abaddon is a strange one because he provides full rerolls to hit in melee and range, or a 4 pinball to the unit within 6 inches of him. He's one of our best units competitively, begrudgingly to a few people, but again, I understand why. But you can bring him with Legionaries, and they would only act as ablative wounds. But he does give them all marks. However, I do think Abaddon is optimally run more with Terminators or as a solo model, as like a centerpiece, where you just bring him and surround him with your rest of the units. So, harkening back to my part 2, which you should watch if you haven't already, you can castle him and put him in a unit that is in the center of the board and just a pain in the ass to deal with, like a Death Star unit, basically. Next up, Chaos Lord. You get the free battle tactic stratagems. So, for example, Profane Zeal gives you full rerolls to wound if you're an undivided unit. Go to ground for the 6-up invul in case you need it. Or Infernal Rites for the worsening AP of incoming attacks by 1. Phenomenally good stratagem for free. Great melee profile with chance for glory, so you're going to run in with a hammer, so you're hitting on 3s, re-rolling all your hits because you're using the... You're probably going to put him next to a Abaddon, getting exploding 6s, and you're also re-rolling all your wounds with a Thunder Hammer at strength 9 -3, 3 damage with dev wounds, which is phenomenal. Just a really good general choice, no downsides pretty much. Is just a great choice. Lucius the Eternal is more of a niche counter pick, but I still think he is going to be a lot stronger upcoming. So the reason for this is because Fight First is insanely busted, and especially working quite well with Legionaries based on their ability. So you want to run them up to the mid-board objective in No Man's Land. Lucius is attached to him. He's got precision in his melee, so any characters that try to charge you, that can potentially cause problems if they punch back. Congratulations, Lucius has now started to attack them. He has 8 attacks, strength 5 -2, 2 damage each, but the amount of just sheer numbers of attacks he's throwing out, some of them are going to get through. And if it's against another Space Marine captain or anything like that, you're wounded on 3s and you're just going to shred him. And you only need to get 2 or 3 through to kill someone. But again, you're probably going to get more than that. Again, the con though is that he is mark locked to Marcus Lanesh, so you will have to bring the Legionaries with Marcus Lanesh. However, for me personally, that's not a problem because I always run Marcus Lanesh anyway. But I think he is basically as a tech choice. He's 95 points with a unit of 10 Legionaries, which is 180. You just bring him into the middle of the board, slap him there. Congratulations, you've just got a 10-man unit that fights first, so anyone who charges you is going to get punched to the point where if they survive it, they will be severely weakened and probably not hit back as hard. And Lucius again shreds as well as your other legionaries. You can just deal an insane amount of damage. They probably can't take a punch, but the positive part is that you are going to deal that much damage, you're not going to care. The Master of Executions, he's precision, dev wounds melee, so strength 5, I think it's 5 attacks, or 6 attacks, I can't remember, I think it's 5. Strength 7, -2, 2 damage, precision, dev wounds. And if you kill a character, which you are wanting to do with this guy, you get a command point. You also get full rerolls to hit in melee if you're attacking a unit that's below their starting strength. The most busted thing about this is you can shoot the unit with another unit, kill one model, or do 1 wound to a vehicle. Congratulations, you now have full rerolls to hit in melee against that unit. This is such a strong ability to have. It's insanely good. If it's below half strength, you also get to reroll wounds against it. He's a good, cheap alternative to Abaddon if you're not bringing him. So Fabius Bile is up next. So he increases a unit's toughness by 1. And if they're in melee, he will give them +1 strength as well. So toughness 5 legionaries are surprisingly hard to chew through. And strength 5 chainswords and strength 9 heavy weapons are very nasty. You're wounding Space Marines on, Terminators on 3s. I know you're wounding them on 3s anyway. My point is that you're doing a lot of damage, okay? Strength 9 is a nice break point for anything that's like toughness 8. You're wounding it on 3s now. And toughness 5 legionaries. Most of the strength 4 weaponry is now wounding you on on 5s instead of 4s, which again, you've just took 16% chance off your opponent to wound you. It's going to help you. In addition, he also has the Acolyte ability, which means you don't have to kill the Acolyte as well. It's just the ability. It doesn't state that the Acolyte dies when you do bring him, where you can use it to essentially nullify a damage instance. So, for example, if someone shoots you with a heavy bolter and it gets 2 through and you fail to save on both, only 1 legionary dies, which, again, an extra legionary in the pocket, you're not going to complain. It's just free. It's a free guy. Like, come on. However, you are mark locked to Chaos Undivided. So for those who aren't familiar with Chaos Undivided, it's I'll be honest, I think Chaos Undivided is actually a really good mark, but a lot of people tend to want to have versatility. And some people love Chaos Undivided, some people don't like it. It's up to the player's discretion, but you are going to have to be mark locked. I also think he's better on Chosen as well, because T5 3 wounds, strength 6 -2 1 damage in melee is just nasty. But again, he's still really good with Legionaries. So, next up are the leaders which are fun for casual games, but not as competitive. So the Exalted Champion, +1 to hit for the unit is attached to, which is both ranged and melee, so they're hitting on 2s now, most of the time, or 3s, depending on what guns you're using, and can add D3 to his melee strength if he dart packs, which is, again, you are dart packed in every single turn. He's reliable, hard hitting. I just think +1 to hit is pretty overrated. I don't rate it at all. And the fact that he is like 70 points, while you can bring him with a leader like attached as well, so you can hit on 2s with a Thunderhammer, it's just not worth bringing a majority of the time. You're generating that many hits, re-rolling hits anyway, it doesn't really matter. But you could probably bring him in a competitive list. He's one of the weird ones. I think the Master of Executions just does what he does better, but again, the guy's not bad at all. Huron Blackheart is redeployment shenanigans, +1 OC to Legionaries, which brings them up to OC3, which is great. And a reactive move once per battle, which can mean it's the Hamadra's knowledge, which is you get to roll a d6 if an enemy moves or shoots you, I think it is, or moves within a certain amount of inches next to you. You get to then reactively move to d6 inches in whichever way you want. So again, listed in my part 2, if you want to go in more detail into that. He's not great, but he's not like offensively bad. Like he's okay. Next up is the Dark Apostle. +1 to wound in melee for the unit. Can remove battle shock from a unit, from any unit within 9 inches, actually. It doesn't have to be his. And can do some mortal wounds with Malign Sacrifice if you are lucky. But if you manage to kill anything with Malign Sacrifice, please do the lottery ticket, because Jesus fucking Christ, you must be the luckiest man alive, because that ability is a fucking joke. Again, he just needs. I think that the guy needs a bit more love, because the Dark Apostle is such a good model. Like I said, he's a personal favourite of mine, but again, he's not bad, but he's not great either. The ones you should avoid. Now, before the entire hordes of chaos come rambling through my PC screen to bite my head off, I would like to mention that the sheer amount of power the Master of Possession has is insane. Like, the guy is an absolute monster and one of the best character killers we have access to, especially with his sacrificial dagger. So he also gives +1 to his he gives sits up, feel no pain, and +1 to advance and charge rolls for the unit. Really good on Legionaries. Great. However, the only reason why he's here is because you can just bring him with possessed instead. He is better for possessed than he is for Legionaries, in my opinion. The model itself, Master of Possessions, exceptionally good. I ranked him 10 out of 10 in my part 2 guide. He is phenomenal. But It's just not good on Legionaries, and this is what we're focusing on. Next up is a Sorcerer, -1 to hit in melee and in ranged, and his Gift of Chaos ability is virtually worthless more often than not. So while cheap, he's a win more guy. So like if you shoot into a unit with a Gift of Chaos ability, if they fail a leadership test, they take D3 mortal wounds in addition. But the problem lies in the fact that he is essentially only good at killing chaff, because very rarely are any decent units going to fail what you want to kill. At least units aren't going to fail leadership tests. It's just it's too niche. Like, yeah, he's great at kicking up and beating up toddlers, but as soon as someone can defend the sends, he immediately folds, which is oddly poetic. But next up is the Warpsmith. He doesn't do anything. Just bring him on his own and put him next to a unit of like Forge Fiends or Obliterators or tanks or Land Raiders or something. He's not a bad unit at all. He's just absolutely useless on Legionaries. There's no point. But the worst unit, in my opinion, for leader is probably the Sorcerer. I think he's absolutely terrible. He is genuinely one of the weirdest units I've ever seen. And if you're going to bring him for 60 points, just bring Cultist instead. Pros for the Legionaries. They are 90 points for 5 and 180 for 10. They are 5 to 10 in their unit size, 32mm base. So your standard Space Marines, basically, just standard Space Marines. Good base kit melee damage, so as mentioned in the loadout, they can throw out a great amount of damage type of D1 and D2 with a decent to great AP. Can still bring a variety of shooting. The Reaper Chain Cannon is great against chaff. Las Cannon can offer you some anti-tank slash anti-vehicle capabilities if you hit, which is a big one. Havoc Auto Cannon is great for elite infantry or even some light vehicles. However, you aren't allowed duplicates, which is a shame because obviously a lot of the time people would just probably bring 2 las cannons and just call it a day. Uh, or 2 chain cannons, which is probably better actually. Reroll wounds in melee means they are reliable damage dealers. So reroll once to wound in melee increases their damage output by 16% on average, which is what they get if they're not on an objective. But if they get full rerolls to hit, full rerolls to wound, which is only available if they're on an objective, it gives them a rough 33 to 40% damage increase on average. The damage only goes up as well if they're given full rerolls to hit, or rerolls of 1 with Chaos Undivided, because you're just throwing out that many attacks, or exploding 5s to hit in melee with Slanesh. They're a jack of all trades unit, which means that they can pretty much do anything that you want them to do actions, play for objectives, synergize really well with a lot of lieutenants and leader units. They're just a good unit for a generalist playstyle. 2 OC, again, not much to say here, but it can kind of hamper some of the shenanigans, like, for example, AdMech, where they can do -1 OC. You can counter that, essentially, and still have the objective. 3 up armor save is good, especially with Infernal Rites, which usually brings them up to a 2 up armor save on average, if you do use it, which I would recommend doing. Infernal Rites is a really good stratagem, and they work really well with Rhinos and transports. They're just a good unit to move around the objective, move around the board and get on objectives. It's that simple. Cons, they are a Space Marine stat line, which means a lot of people are going to have stuff in the back pocket, which means that they are going to kill you very reliably. So, for example, heavy bolters, any 2 damage weaponry with even decent AP, like 2 AP, 2 damage, is really bad into these guys. It will mean that every time you fail, you lose a guy. But again, there's not much that can be done about that. They are good into 1 damage weapons, but if your opponent targets them, just bear with me a second, I'm going to yawn. Sorry about that. But if your opponent targets them with 3 damage weaponry, then they're going to waste the damage because they could have used that into Chosen or Terminators. But they're a nice balance between durable against low volume, against low damage weapons, and good against 3 damage, because if your opponent's shooting your Legionaries with 3 damage, there's something severely wrong with them. They're not the master of everything, though. Like I said, jack of all trades, master of none. They're not spectacular, outstanding. They're just good. So they'll deal good damage, average movement, relatively easy to kill, stat line, and are good with pretty much every stratagem we've got access to. If you're looking for more specialized models, we have other options which do what they do better. So shooting, Forge Fiends, Havocs, or Obliterators. Melee, Chosen are better, Terminators are better. Movement, Tricks, Warp Talons, Raptors, or Bikers. Actions after moving, you've got your your Noise Marines, which can advance and do actions because they've got Assault, and Chosen, which again can do the same thing. Legionaries, I'm underselling them here though. I do think, which you're gonna know now. Uh, Legionaries are the 9 to 5 Monday to Friday unit in our codex. They are the average guys. They do everything okay, but where would I rank them? I would rank them 8.5 out of 10. They're just under 9, I think. And the reason for this is they're hamstringed a lot by their stat line, in my opinion. So they're an extremely good unit, in my opinion. I do not think these guys are bad at all. They're adaptable. They do good damage in melee. Shooting's less to be desired, but the chain cannon can compensate for it. But the biggest weakness is the stat line. They can't be exceptional if they're not, unless they're like a boatload cheaper. They're not going to be in the exceptional category. You will see them a lot. They're still going to be brought in many lists due to the fact that Chosen got nerfed and these guys are going to look better in comparison. Legionaries have never been bad. It's just that, well, in 10th edition, they've never been bad. It's just that Chosen do what they did better for a better points cost. Whereas now, Legionaries are in a good spot. I think they're great for newer players because they're a simple stat line. Uh, they work with pretty much anything you try and do with them. They're not particular, like I said, they're a jack of all trades. They're just good for new players because they can experiment and try it out. Whereas with more experienced players and better players than I, they are going to have a lot of tricks and combinations that you can put with people. Like, for example, Master of Executions, Fabius Bile, Abaddon, Chaos Lords. All of these little tricks that these really good players are going to use are going to make these guys hit way harder than they should or be way more useful than they should. And like I've said, they'll prove very lethal in the hands of an experienced player. So that's the end of part 3. Thank you for watching as always. Your patience is appreciated. I have been quite ill recently. There's been a lot of stuff going on in my life, and like I said, I do make these in my spare time. I don't really have much spare time as of recently, and by that I mean within the last 4 months, but I'm not going to monologue. So if you feel like you've enjoyed it, or if you feel like you've learned anything, or even if you just want to be nice, please like and subscribe, and please share this video if you feel generous enough to do so. So part 4, when I do eventually get round to it, is going to focus primarily on our vehicles and our transports. So this does include demon engines. So your Forge Fiends, Obliterators, Rhinos, Land Raiders, Predator tanks, Annihilators, that kind of thing. Part 5 is yet to be decided. However, it's probably going to be with around that time. I'd said the codex will have probably been released, and I'll have a look more into what detachments are best and what units fit into each detachment better. Uh, but yeah, without me dragging this on longer than it needs to be, I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for taking time out of your day to learn something and to watch me ramble on about my favourite space toys. And wherever you are, I hope you're having a really good day. And always remember to praise the dark gods. Thank you for watching, guys. Peace.